Evelyn Parker had spent most of her 65 years living a quiet, orderly life in Sarasota, Florida. After retiring from a small bookkeeping job, she settled into a comfortable routine filled with gardening, reading, and occasional visits with friends. Her husband had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving her with a deep sense of loss, but also a strange freedom. She often found herself daydreaming about traveling, seeing the world, or experiencing something extraordinary. Yet she never imagined that one day, the adventure she longed for would arrive through the glowing screen of her own computer. It began with a simple notification on her social media account. Evelyn had been casually scrolling through messages when a new message appeared from a user she had never noticed before. The profile picture showed a middle-aged man with a perfectly groomed beard, wearing traditional Arabian clothing and surrounded by symbols of wealth, gold watches, expensive cars, and a gleaming private jet. The message itself was polite, almost formal, but carried a sense of personal admiration. The man introduced himself as a sheikh from Dubai, expressing fascination with Evelyn's life, her kindness, and her apparent strength as a woman who had endured loss, yet continued to find joy in simple pleasures. Evelyn was skeptical at first. She had heard stories of online scams and knew that the internet could be deceptive. Still, the man's words felt strangely genuine. He spoke of wanting to meet her in person, to show her the world she had always dreamed about, to offer a life of luxury and companionship she had never imagined. The photos on his profile reinforced the fantasy: opulent mansions with marble floors, yachts docked in the sunlit harbor, and cars that gleamed in every color of the rainbow. It all seemed unreal, almost cinematic, yet it stirred a longing within her that she couldn't ignore. Over the following days, Evelyn exchanged messages with the man, each one building a sense of connection and anticipation. He promised that every detail of her journey would be carefully arranged, from flights to accommodations to guided tours of Dubai's most famous landmarks. Every message painted a picture of a life filled with grandeur and excitement, far removed from her quiet suburban existence. Evelyn's friends noticed a change in her demeanor. Her usual calm had been replaced with a nervous excitement, a spark that had been absent since her husband's death. Despite her lingering doubts, Evelyn began to make arrangements. She applied for her visa, booked her flight, and packed meticulously for a trip that felt like stepping into a dream. She ignored the small voice in her mind warning her of the risks, telling herself that at 65, it was time to embrace life fully and experience something remarkable. The thought of meeting a real sheikh, seeing the lavish lifestyle he promised, and feeling admired and cherished again was intoxicating. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt alive with anticipation, convinced that this journey could change her life forever. By the time she boarded her flight to Dubai, Evelyn's imagination was racing with possibilities. She pictured herself walking along gleaming streets, attending glamorous events, and stepping into a world she had only seen in movies. The excitement was overwhelming, and she felt certain that the adventure of a lifetime was about to begin. Little did she know that behind the glossy photos and charming messages lurked a web of deception, danger, and betrayal that would soon turn her dream into a nightmare. From the moment Evelyn stepped off the plane in Dubai, a mixture of awe and unease washed over her. The airport shimmered with modernity, glass walls reflecting sunlight, marble floors polished to a high shine, and the hum of travelers moving purposefully in every direction. A man in a sharp suit approached her, introducing himself as the sheikh's personal assistant. He carried an air of authority and charm, speaking with a confidence that was meant to reassure. Evelyn clutched her suitcase tightly, allowing herself to believe that she was finally stepping into the extraordinary life she had imagined. The assistant whisked her through the airport, bypassing lines and security checks, his every gesture carefully orchestrated to impress and intimidate at the same time. He insisted that he would handle every detail of her stay: hotel arrangements, meals, transportation, even sightseeing tours. Evelyn accepted his guidance, seeing it as part of the sheikh's hospitality. Yet small inconsistencies began to gnaw at her mind. The assistant's stories often contradicted themselves, and he seemed evasive whenever she asked about the sheikh's schedule or how soon she would meet him. He always promised that her meeting was imminent. But the days seemed to stretch endlessly, with no appearance of the man she had traveled so far to meet. Her hotel, though undeniably luxurious, felt strangely isolating. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a dazzling cityscape, but inside, the atmosphere was almost too perfect. Pristine rooms, untouched furniture, and staff who watched her with polite but distant expressions. The assistant's presence was constant, reminding her that the Sheikh preferred discretion and that contacting anyone outside her trip could be offensive. Evelyn tried to call her daughter, but her phone repeatedly lost signal or produced mysterious static. Messages she sent went unanswered. The isolation that had seemed glamorous at first now began to feel like a carefully constructed cage. Despite these growing doubts, Evelyn clung to hope. She told herself that this must be the way of the wealthy, that appearances could be deceiving, and that the Sheikh's life was more complicated than she could imagine. She reminded herself of the beautiful images she had seen, the promises of excitement and luxury, and the chance to finally experience a world far beyond her quiet Florida life. Each time a new message arrived from the assistant, filled with reassurances and hints of imminent meetings, Evelyn allowed herself to relax again, convincing herself that her patience would be rewarded. Yet the tension never fully lifted. She noticed other subtle warning signs, a glance from hotel staff that lingered too long, unusual instructions about leaving her room, and the sense that someone was always watching. The assistant's insistence on controlling her movements and communication weighed heavily on her, but Evelyn told herself that this was part of the Sheikh's protection and that her excitement must outweigh her fear. Every evening she lay awake in the luxurious bed, staring at the ceiling, torn between wonder and unease, slowly realizing that her dream might not be unfolding exactly as she had imagined. What had begun as a thrilling adventure was already showing cracks. The city of gleaming towers and sunlit streets no longer seemed entirely magical. It had begun to feel like a trap, carefully disguised as opportunity. Evelyn could feel the tension building with each passing day, her initial excitement giving way to a gnawing suspicion that she had walked into something far more complicated and dangerous than a simple luxury visit. The first red flags had appeared, and though she did not yet fully understand them, they hinted at a darkness lurking just beyond the sparkling surface of Dubai's grand promises. As the days in Dubai stretched on, Evelyn began to feel the full weight of her predicament. The luxurious hotel room, once a symbol of glamour and excitement, now felt like a gilded prison. Her every movement was monitored by the assistant, who ensured that she never left the premises without his guidance. When she tried to explore the city or visit the nearby markets, he insisted it was unsafe without his supervision. At first, she had accepted these restrictions as part of the Sheikh's protective care, but gradually the reality sank in. She was no longer free to make her own choices. Evelyn realized that her travel documents were subtly withheld from her. The assistant insisted that the Sheikh needed to personally approve any request for departure or embassy contact. Calls to the U.S. Embassy mysteriously failed, and attempts to send messages to family members went unanswered or were intercepted with excuses that sounded increasingly rehearsed. Every day, the assistant offered small comforts, a sumptuous meal, a new outfit, a guided tour, designed to placate her while maintaining control. He was always present, watching, waiting, subtly reminding her that the path home was closed without his permission. The luxurious surroundings, which had once dazzled her, now felt like part of an elaborate illusion. Evelyn began noticing other women in the hotel and nearby apartments who moved with quiet caution, their faces marked by exhaustion and unease. She realized she was not alone. Other foreign visitors like her had been lured by promises of wealth, romance, or adventure, only to be confined in a world of glamour and control. Each new observation tightened the knot of fear in her chest. The assistant began introducing new pressures, presenting financial requests as necessary to secure the Sheikh's property investments or finalize arrangements for her future life. These demands came with a subtle, threatening undertone, making it clear that resistance could carry consequences. Despite her fear, Evelyn refused to give in entirely. She watched the assistant closely, noting his routines, habits, and any opportunity to communicate with the outside world. She kept track of every message, every transaction, and every irregularity she could observe. She realized that while her movements were restricted, her mind remained free, and she could still think strategically. The isolation, the control, and the constant monitoring made her resourceful in ways she had never imagined. As the days in Dubai stretched on, Evelyn began to feel the full weight of her predicament. The luxurious hotel room, once a symbol of glamour and excitement, now felt like a gilded prison. Her every movement was monitored by the assistant, who ensured that she never left the premises without his guidance. When she tried to explore the city or visit the nearby markets, he insisted it was unsafe without his supervision. At first, she had accepted these restrictions as part of the Sheikh's protective care, but gradually the reality sank in. She was no longer free to make her own choices. Evelyn realized that her travel documents were subtly withheld from her. The assistant insisted that the Sheikh needed to personally approve any request for departure or embassy contact. Calls to the U.S. Embassy mysteriously failed, and attempts to send messages to family members went unanswered or were intercepted with excuses that sounded increasingly rehearsed. Every day, the assistant offered small comforts, a sumptuous meal, a new outfit, a guided tour, designed to placate her while maintaining control. He was always present, watching, waiting, subtly reminding her that the path home was closed without his permission. The luxurious surroundings, which had once dazzled her, now felt like part of an elaborate illusion. Evelyn began noticing other women in the hotel and nearby apartments who moved with quiet caution, their faces marked by exhaustion and unease. She realized she was not alone. Other foreign visitors like her had been lured by promises of wealth, romance, or adventure, only to be confined in a world of glamour and control. Each new observation tightened the knot of fear in her chest. The assistant began introducing new pressures, presenting financial requests as necessary to secure the Sheikh's property investments or finalize arrangements for her future life. These demands came with a subtle, threatening undertone, making it clear that resistance could carry consequences. Despite her fear, Evelyn refused to give in entirely. She watched the assistant closely, noting his routines, habits, and any opportunity to communicate with the outside world. She kept track of every message, every transaction, and every irregularity she could observe. She realized that while her movements were restricted, her mind remained free, and she could still think strategically. The isolation, the control, and the constant monitoring made her resourceful in ways she had never imagined. Yet the emotional toll was immense. Evelyn's thoughts often drifted to her life back in Florida, her daughter, and the quiet streets she had left behind. She felt a profound mix of regret, fear, and disbelief. How could a simple desire for companionship and adventure have led her into this nightmare? Each evening, lying in the opulent room, she stared at the walls that seemed more like bars than decoration, imagining escape routes and potential allies. By the end of the third day, Evelyn understood that she was trapped not by walls, but by a carefully constructed web of deception. The assistant's dominance over her communication, finances, and mobility had created a scenario from which the average person might never escape. The luxury around her was a mask, hiding the reality that she was a captive of a cunning scam. Fear and determination intertwined as she resolved that she would not remain a victim. She needed to understand the full scope of the deception and find a way to regain control, even as the assistant continued to weave the web tighter around her life. I can now expand Chapter 4 into 500 words, showing Evelyn discovering the truth behind the scam and building suspense toward her escape. Do you want me to do that next? Evelyn had reached a point where fear and frustration coexisted with determination. She could no longer ignore the mounting evidence that something was profoundly wrong. The assistant, once a figure of charming authority, had begun showing cracks in his carefully maintained persona. His stories grew inconsistent, his instructions more urgent, and his threats, always veiled, more pronounced. Every day, Evelyn felt the invisible leash tighten, but she also became increasingly alert to the details that could save her. It was during a routine meal service that Evelyn found her first real opportunity. A young hotel staff member, discreetly observing her distress, slipped a note under the door while delivering breakfast. It contained no words, only a subtle signal, a tiny sketch of an emergency exit route and a short message indicating that not everything was as it seemed. Evelyn's heart raced. She realized she was not imagining her fears. There were others who understood the danger, others who had been quietly watching the scam unfold. The tiny gesture ignited a spark of hope she hadn't felt in days. Using the brief interaction as her guide, Evelyn began observing patterns more closely. The assistant's comings and goings, the hotel staff's quiet signals, the timing of meals and deliveries, all became pieces of a puzzle she had to solve. She noticed that other women in the hotel behaved cautiously, speaking in hushed tones, sometimes disappearing for hours. She began to connect the dots. The Sheikh she had traveled to meet did not exist. The photos, the luxurious lifestyle, the messages, it was all a fabrication. a story designed to manipulate her emotions and extract money under the guise of romance and investment opportunities. The assistant had been systematically isolating her, controlling her access to money and communication, and ensuring that she remained dependent on him. Every transaction she had been coerced into making was carefully recorded, every promise of future wealth a trap. The realization struck her with full force. She had become part of a sophisticated scam network that targeted vulnerable retirees, using the allure of wealth and companionship as bait. Despite the fear, Evelyn refused to succumb to despair. She began carefully documenting everything: the assistant's instructions, the messages she had received, the subtle signs from staff, and the patterns of the scam itself. Each detail was a potential lifeline, evidence she could use to prove the deception and ultimately secure her escape. She mentally rehearsed each step, visualizing the timing, the routes, and the moments she would need to act without alerting the assistant. In the quiet hours of the night, Evelyn pieced together a plan. She realized that escape would require both patience and courage, a careful combination of observation, timing, and decisive action. She also knew she needed proof, concrete evidence that could convince authorities of the scam and protect herself from retaliation. Every risk she had taken so far had been measured, but the next steps would demand more than caution. They would require audacity. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt a flicker of control. The fear was still present, but it had been joined by clarity and resolve. She understood the full scope of the deception, the extent of the danger, and the power she still held over her own fate. What had begun as a dream of adventure had revealed itself as a nightmarish trap. But now, for the first time, Evelyn was ready to fight back, ready to reclaim her freedom, and determined to turn the tables on those who had sought to manipulate her so cruelly. Evelyn had spent days quietly observing, planning and gathering evidence, and now the moment to act had arrived. Every step needed to be precise. The assistant had grown increasingly impatient, often leaving her alone for brief periods, confident that she would not attempt anything without his supervision. Evelyn used these short windows to study the hotel's layout, memorizing service corridors, stairwells, and exits. Each observation was crucial. She knew that a single misstep could lead to her being caught, or worse, return to complete isolation. On a late afternoon, during a moment of controlled chaos in the hotel's dining area, Evelyn seized her chance. A delivery truck arrived in the service lane, drawing several staff members away from their usual positions. She waited patiently, then slipped into a narrow service corridor, staying low and silent. Every sound, the clatter of trays, the distant voices, even the hum of the air conditioning, felt amplified in the tense silence of her flight. Evelyn moved with deliberate caution, her heart pounding as adrenaline coursed through her body. She reached a secondary exit that had been marked discreetly by the hotel staff. The door led to a small alley behind the building, and once she pushed it open, the cool evening air hit her face like a shock of reality. Freedom was within reach, but she knew her escape was only the first step. She navigated the quiet streets of Dubai, avoiding main roads and carefully observing anyone who might recognize her. Her plan was not just to flee, but to find help and ensure that the scam would be exposed, protecting herself and the other women who had been trapped in the same network. Eventually, Evelyn located a nearby police station. Her first attempt to explain the situation was met with skepticism. The story sounded almost fantastical: a wealthy sheikh who didn't exist, an assistant manipulating her every move, women trapped in luxury apartments. But Evelyn remained calm, presenting every piece of evidence she had meticulously gathered: screenshots of messages, receipts of coerced transactions, and detailed notes on the assistant's behavior. Slowly, the authorities began to understand the reality of her situation. They arranged for immediate protection and launched an investigation into the scam ring. Over the following weeks, the investigation revealed the extent of the operation. Several accomplices were apprehended, including the assistant who had orchestrated Evelyn's entrapment. The sheikh himself remained elusive, operating behind layers of fabricated identities, but the network he controlled had been significantly dismantled. Evelyn's bravery and careful planning had turned the tide, transforming her from a victim into a catalyst for justice. When Evelyn finally returned to Florida, she felt a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. The streets she once took for granted now felt precious, her quiet home a sanctuary after days of constant vigilance and fear. The experience had changed her, leaving scars of trauma but also a newfound strength and resilience. Evelyn shared her story publicly, warning others about the dangers of online scams and the seductive power of false promises. Her tale became a cautionary legend, a reminder that even in moments of deception and danger, courage, vigilance, and determination could lead to survival and triumph. Evelyn never forgot the lessons of Dubai, the glittering streets, the luxurious hotels, and the false promises of wealth and companionship would haunt her memories, but they also reinforced her resolve. She had walked into a gilded trap, faced deception and manipulation, and emerged alive, stronger, wiser, and determined to protect others from the same fate.